This is the Workplace Podcast with your host, William Corless. Brought to you in association with Yellowwood, your external learning and development partner. Each week we focus on a different aspect of the workplace. We hear from guest speakers who are subject matter experts and who are incredibly talented at what they do. These experts will give you a different perspective and insight to work life, with the aim of empowering you to take a different path to success in all aspects of work life. These perspectives will include career and personal success, leadership, high-performance teams, and creating a better work-life culture and organisation. Yellowwood. Take a different path to success with your career, team, and organisation.
Welcome to the Workplace Podcast. Joining me today to discuss her book, The Mother of All Jobs, is Christine Armstrong. Christine studies the world of work. She researches, she writes, speaks, and vlogs, which is how I discovered Christine. The vlogs are about the workplace trends and data and what's working, what isn't working. And some of these topics include collaboration, innovation, multi-generational working, AI in the tech paradox, productivity, working, parenting, and caring. Christine previously co-founded Jericho Chambers, an early example of flexible and hybrid work, and writes regularly for The Times and The Telegraph. She was recently named 6th out of the top 50 future of work influencers in the world, and named a top 50 workplace leader in 2023 for driving cultural change. She's also the author of The Mother of All Jobs, How to Have Children and a Career and Stay Sane-ish. And the book is based on 6 years of interviews with working parents, employers, leadership experts, and carers. And that's our topic today. Christine, welcome to the Workplace Podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure to be with you.
So I've been a big fan of yours. I came across your vlogs first, which I think if anybody's listening here, follow Christine straight away on LinkedIn. You will thank me later on. So Christine, would you like to let the listeners know how we first met in real life, or IRL as they say?
So you have to picture the scene, right? So Elaine, who I work with, who sort of runs all of my operations and all of our projects, lives in Dublin, and we used to live very close to each other in London before she moved. And so I bring my 3 children over to Dublin to visit. It is absolutely pouring with rain, and Elaine has booked this amazing schedule, and we go, what's that thing, Tato Park, you know, that amazing theme park with the women, and we go to all these amazing places. We go to, what's that beautiful glen with the beautiful monastery, and it's a Glen,
Powers Court.
Glendalough, is that what it's called?
Glendalough, yeah.
It's the most beautiful place in the world. Pouring everywhere we go is pouring with rain. Anyway, then we go on the Viking bus tour in Dublin. We've all got Viking hats on our heads with horns, and I've got my 3 kids, her 3 kids. It's absolute pandemonium. There's a guy yelling and singing in the street and shouting at passers-by. The whole thing was bad. We got up and you go, "Oh my God, it's you from the vlog!" And my kids are like, "Really, Mum? Here, somebody recognizes you." But it was lovely. We've got a great photo of us, haven't we, in the street with our Viking hats?
Yeah, it was brilliant. I just had to go, "Oh, by the way, are you Christine Armstrong?" And you go, "Yes, I am." And like the look of shock in your face, someone in Dublin actually recognizes me. What we should be talking about today is actually this fantastic book. Now, it has been written several years ago. I have to say, wish I had read this 6 years ago when it came out. This is wall to wall with wisdom, nuggets. I like the way that you have it designed out chronologically, because the book then is about everything from getting pregnant or thinking about it, or what are the factors that you need to consider. And this is the thing, there's no such thing as the silver bullet. It all depends on your context, which you bring in magically. And then what I love at the end of this, and this is what people say is, "Oh, I'm not sure if I'll read a book." You don't have to commit to reading the full book. You have Tired and Wired at the end of each chapter, where you bring all the learning together, and it goes all the way through, like all the challenges from getting pregnant to teenagers, about returning back to work. There's so much jam packed in there. Do you mind me asking how long it took you to write this book? Because it just seems like
I think it took about a year. I mean, the thing is, like, as you said, though, it was based on interviews. So what happened was I was working in an ad agency when I got pregnant the first time. I had a really great boss.
Yeah.
And I'd done a bit of writing with Management Today, which is a UK kind of business magazine, and I
Yeah.
was traveling a lot with work, and I asked the editor if I could just write some blogs on traveling for work while being pregnant, because in every country you get a really different response. And he was like, yeah, be my guest. And then after I had the baby and I couldn't really figure out how to make things work, I started to interview loads of working parents. We called them power mums and power dads. So I think compressing it all at the end probably took sort of about a year, maybe a bit more, 15 months. But really the work had been done because I just had that bank.
And this is what I noticed about the book. Sometimes books peter out towards the end. It runs out of energy. This is not the case in this book. It has that momentum all the way through. And I'd like to quote from that book, the introduction. The mother of all jobs is about the battle to make modern working parenting actually work. If not for our own well-being and sanity, then perhaps for our children's. What a powerful statement.
I don't think we're there yet, though, are we? It's still a really tough old battle.
Yeah, and that's why I like where your vlogs are so valuable then for our listeners then, because it's here's the trends, here's the data, and here's what research, or here's what experts are saying about that. Um, and what I like then about the book then, it's, as I said, it's about maybe thinking about having a family, the struggles conceiving. Like, I think what's good about this is when to a former worker, whether to return to the workplace or not. Like, you cover so many different things, like alpha beta couples and alpha alpha couples, and then if the dad is the lead parent. And I like all those different things. So we might talk about that today. And here's the thing is, I have to give my wife a lot of credit that she was actually able to access a lot of the information like you did through interviews, or people who are older generations, or, people who are actually just gone through it. You get that information. And a lot of people don't have access to that information network. And this is where I think this book is truly invaluable, not just to women, but I think of working parents, then that it's really should be a joined up conversation we're having, isn't it?
Yeah, if I did it now, I wouldn't call it the mother of all jobs. And that was a suggestion by somebody else in the publisher, actually. And I think they're thinking about marketing and targeting. And we know most books are
Yeah,
bought by women. So
yeah,
it makes sense from a marketing perspective. But from my perspective, we should always be talking about both genders, all genders, being
yeah.
involved as parents, whatever your family shape is, whether you're a
Mm.
single parent or not. And what I tried to do with the book was to do justice to all the different ways we can parent. And obviously you can't do everything, but I tried to make it as big a range as I could.
Yeah, and that's what I'd like to call this, is actually working parents, because then it's that's what you're saying is sometimes that there's the choices that we make there, whether we live in an apartment which is close to the city center, or actually do we go suburban where we're going to get more of a community feel there. These are all the choices then to consider, and then there's trade-offs there. And if we have that knowledgeable conversation, then, or informed conversation, then we can make decisions then based on that, which will reduce strife and tension between couples, or managing expectations. And that's where I'm going to go to next. I met a wonderful lady years ago, and she used to be the head of learning and development for Bank of America. And I was asking for her advice for working parents, and specifically working mothers. And I says, like, what advice would you give? And she says, you can have it all, just not at the same time.
Yeah, it's a good line.
What are your thoughts on that? Because
Because that is something people say, and I think it's absolutely right. You can't have it all at the same time. Somebody else in the book says, who has it all? My husband doesn't have it all. I don't have it all.
yeah,
Keir Starmer doesn't have it all. Nobody has it all. So it is a kind of, I think it's an unhelpful aspiration to have it all, or certainly the idea. Now, what I think generally is that the idea of having it all was a Cosmopolitan magazine line from the 70s. And what I do say in the book is, having interviewed a lot of people who were at the peak of their career in the 70s, what was meant by the term, which was you could have a big job and have a family and a relationship and be happy, was more true then than it turned out to be later. And the reason it was more true was because at that period there were no laptops, mobile phones, or Blackberries. And so what people who worked in that era would say was, yeah, it was really misogynist in a lot of industries. and very hard work. But you went to work, you worked from 9 to 5 or 6 or whatever, and then you went home. And unless somebody rang your landline to say that the office was on fire, you didn't hear from anyone until the next day. So if you had childcare through your family, or you paid somebody or whatever, you could do a full day's job, be seen as equal in terms of time and participation, and go home and be a parent. And what changed with laptops and globalization in terms of, we've got a conference call with Shanghai, we've got a call with Sydney, we've got a call with San Francisco, was the day got bigger and bigger and bigger. We're always online. And then both parents were working at that pace with undefined days. And so pre-COVID, you get this enormous amount of pressure and stress that really felt for some people that you couldn't have any of it.
And that's where societal expectations are different. Where you talk in the book about growing up in the 70s and how parenting was in the 70s to how it is now, and then again ways of working where it is now. And then you were saying there is sometimes it's I have to have the nice car or the nice holiday or the nice house, and then it's like I should return to work and have to be really successful. There is something about some people feel like they're mother guilt, or they might be feeling that because they're a really good mother, then there's a trade-off then with career, and then I don't get it promoted at work. What would you say about that? People are putting pressure on themselves.
Well, I think people do put pressure on themselves. I mean, as you say, it's a trade-off. And you might think, lots of women that I interviewed, lots of men that I interviewed said, you know what, I realized what was important after I had kids. I didn't want to get promoted anymore. I wanted just to find a job where I could just go to work, do my job, go home and be happy. And in many ways, those people tend, on the whole, if I made a sweeping generalization, to be happier and more content with their lives sometimes. There's some of those people who said, I've always wanted to be in the boardroom, I've always wanted to be a partner at my firm, whatever, and so I'm going to keep going with that. And I think that path can be much harder. But I think you have to be true to who you are. If you're ambitious and you're going to be frustrated at staying in a middle ranked level because it's just not where you want to be, then it's probably not going to work very well for you or your family. And equally, some of those people in those middle level jobs, really struggle to provide enough for their kids because some of those jobs are so badly paid. And a friend of mine is a single mum and she's a nurse. She's got nearly 30 years experience. She can't afford to take her kids on foreign holidays. She lives in a very nice house, but she wouldn't say that she's got the money that she wants to provide the lifestyle she would really like to provide for her kids in terms of the activities they might do, in terms of taking them on some trips and things like that. So it's a trade-off between your ambition, your needs, what you see as good parenting or a good life, and we all have to figure out a sort of a mix and match of things that are possible and that work for us as best we can.
So that's the $1 million question then. If people say, well, what actually the research shows that what actually makes the happiest couples who are both working parents, what is the recipe then?
So I think I don't think it's as simple as a magic one recipe. I think there's a couple of factors that go together. So one is the balance in the partnership. If you've got two parents, if you've got a single parent, sometimes single parents are happier than couples. So an unhappy couple is usually less happy than a single parent who's made some decisions about how they live their life. So you have a family unit. If you're a single parent, generally I found the most successful single parents have really good networks. It might be family, might be friends, usually a combination of both to make it all work. The couples that make it work take turns. They kind of know whose turn it is to be more engaged at home and more engaged externally. They're very good communicators. They're very good at splitting roles. They're very good at making it feel fair to both of them. And that might look very different in different households, but if it feels fair to them, then that's great. I think the next factor I talk about a lot is what I call whole house thinking, which is families get really stressed when they fixate on one person. So say there's two parents and one child. If they put the needs of that child beyond everything else in the household, that can work while there's two parents on one child. It often falls apart when a second child comes along, or if the parental relationship becomes unstable. So what I say is, what I observe is that families where they think, okay, you need to sleep, you need to sleep, you need to sleep, you need to get to work, you need to be able, to cope with the classroom and, be able to do this. I need this. And once they've got all those things broadly working, that's what works in a household. So thinking about everyone's needs. Really good example of this was somebody I interviewed who had 3 children in 3 different schools because they all had different interests and genders. And then she's like, but I'm broken because doing 3 drop-offs, 3 pickups, 3 sports days, 3 end of term services, like I can't cope. So this needs to change. So whole house thinking, everybody's needs. I think people who also have very realistic takes on the finances. So the most stressed couples or families or households I see are the ones where their financial setup is not matching where their lifestyle, where their household is. So people who perhaps went into parenting with 2 big jobs, going on lovely foreign holidays, they've got a big mortgage, a nice car. Suddenly they want capacity to make different decisions. One of them wants to step back from work for a bit, maybe work a few days differently or take some time out, but their finances don't support that. And the big one for that, the big mistake I saw in professional people in professional jobs was private schools was it puts huge burdens on households. So those are a few of the factors, I think. And it's not all of them, but those are some of the big factors that impact on whether a household is happy or not.
And then what's least happy? What are the kind of the pitfalls that people fall into that they're the least happiest couples? Because I know this is at the end of the book where you give a lot of your learnings then, and definitely read this book, people, especially if you're working parent.
So I think the least happy, I think there's 2 categories I would say. When you have 2, we talked about alpha parents. So when alpha, I don't mean pushy or particularly aggressive parents. I just mean 2 parents who are really into their own careers. And in some ways, alpha couples can work really well because if they've got good jobs, they can afford a lot of care. So they can have a nanny and, you know, they can feel quite good with that. I think what I saw repeatedly was that sometimes that gets really tricky later on when they haven't been at home for some of the early years, they've missed key moments, they possibly, if I'm really brutal from the outside, they possibly haven't honed their own parenting techniques, and suddenly their kid at 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 has a real wobble and they don't feel well grounded because they've been very fixated on the external world, and some of the groundwork that they maybe could have done hasn't happened. And then what you see very often is people have to backfill that work. So then they quite often take some time out or work differently for a while to rebuild that relationship and to figure out what's going on and to get the support that they need and maybe the kid needs. And I saw a similar parallel pattern with some people who had kids, and it's going to sound really harsh, but there is a model of parenting which, if you've got enough money, you can have a planned C-section rather than a birth. You can have a night nanny, you can get a day nanny, you can get a lot of family support. And some of those people almost seem to insulate themselves from the reality of small babies. So they sail through the baby in early years, they get a lot of support. But in almost every case, when I tracked those people over time, there was a moment later where they really reconnected and they really came back and said, actually, you know, this isn't something you can insulate. You kind of have to go through that process of being a different person because you're a parent. I've been reading a fantastic book at the moment, A Motherkind by Zoe Blaskey, who talks a lot about matrescence, which is how your brain changes when you become a mother. And I think you can defer that if you've got resources, but I don't think you ever escape it.
And that's the thing then, as you were saying before, then is that going back to work, then people maybe reevaluate, you know, what's the couple dynamic, it's the whole house thinking. And this is why this book is important, because they ask you a lot of the questions, what do we need to change, and it points you in that direction. And then you have is it 3 different types of mother, that some people are raring to go back to work, some people, you know, really don't want to go back, and some people are sitting on the fence. And this is where that reevaluation is going on. Suddenly some things are going, fears are going on, or some people are just like, oh, I can't wait to go back to this. And maybe sometimes they're avoiding the real work of parenting there.
Well, they're finding it hard. You know, I think I say in the book, you know, I remember when I had 3 who were maybe 6 and under. And what I take one of them to a birthday party at my friend's house. She's married to a vicar. She's the loveliest person, and it's the most beautiful party you've seen. There's like little glasses with jellies and decoration, a beautiful, beautiful homemade cake. There are lovely crafts and toys. And I was just like, and she had 4 kids. I was like, you know, how do you do this? This is unbelievable. And she said, Christine, my safe, happy place. This is it. I love parties. I love being at home. I love doing this for my kids. She's like, your safe, happy place is probably in a boardroom. And she was right. You know, I'd spent 10 or 15 years presenting, speaking to people, being in meetings. I knew how to operate in that world. I didn't know how to operate with a screaming 6-year-old or go, you know, cope with 2 hours sleep. So I had to learn those things, and it was really hard.
And that's, I love the level of honesty in the book, because, you know, if we haven't had that exposure to, because the way that we live now is very different, because we're not surrounded by that family network anymore then, and we're more isolated then. So people feel kind of isolated, they feel trapped, you know, they feel like there's a loss, and there's a real adaptation then to becoming a parent, isn't there?
Well, we go through, many of us have children later these days. So, you know, a lot of people will be having children in their late 20s, early 30s, and they might have spent 10 years very much in an external world where, you know, they got their income, they got paid, they went out, they had friends who maybe weren't that local. You know, Dublin's big place, difficult to get around, the traffic's terrible, same as London, same as a lot of other cities. And so your network is very scattered. And when you have children, your world becomes very geographically small. You can't take a baby on a long bus ride or a long train ride, or you can, but you don't on the whole. You want people who are super, super local to you, that you can walk to the park with, have a coffee with, pop to their house. And so that means you're reframing the world you live in, the people that you see day in, day out, the environments that you're in. Now, if you're prepared for that, that's great. But I remember with my first baby, you know, the postman, I didn't know who our postman was before I had a baby, because I was never at home when the post came. And so just adjusting to the rhythms of being at home and a neighborhood was a huge transition. So I think it is a really, really big change for a lot of people. And I think the more that we talk about it and normalize it, the more helpful it can be, because people have to break out. It feels initially very isolating, and then you have to rebuild networks. But if no one tells you to do that, it can take a while to figure that out.
And speaking of, you know, figuring out, then some people are putting pressure on themselves to, well, society expects me not to work at home, to work in a job. And then what if people say, well, actually, I feel embarrassed to tell my colleagues I don't want a promotion, or I do want a promotion, but you know, that means I'll have to work 5 days and not 3 days. So how do you manage that, like, career progression if, you know, your
Yeah.
company isn't suited to that?
Okay, well, if your company's not suited it, then that's a big personal review. I think there's 2 things going on. And one of the really great bits of advice, which I got but found hard to use, was there is a season for everything. So often we put pressure on ourselves to go back to how we were before, which is not possible. We're only going forwards. We don't return. So we're not going to go back. We have to create a world of work that works for us at this point, which may be very different to in 6 months, a year, 5 years. That's the thing with parenting. It doesn't, not a moment where you give birth and then it stops, is it? It keeps changing over time. So you have to make decisions based on where you are at that point. And that may include the company that you work with, the kind of company and the model that you want to work. If you really want to work at home, the great news is post-COVID, you can probably find a job that's based at home. You may find with small children that it's easier to be out for some of the time. A lot of people I talk to do find that. So you've got to figure out what model works for you, and then find a role, hopefully, that can match that as best you can. It's not perfect, it never is, but you're trying to find as good a match as you can manage that allows you to be the parent you want to be and do the kind of work you want or can do for the kind of income you need to make your life work. And that's a tricky thing to balance, but that's what we're all trying to do, right?
Yeah, and that's where some people are placing so much value on your profession, where actually, where do you derive value? Do you derive value in your health and, you know, your, you know, the strength of your relationship with your children and your partner, and, you know, there's lots of different ways to drive.
I mean, there is
Um,
no doubt that longitudinal study that they always put out from Harvard, they've been studying, you know, people for what is it, 70, 80 years. And there is no doubt that the key factor that gives us happiness in life is the quality of our relationships. And to have a quality relationship with your partner, with your kids, with your family, with your friends, with your neighbors takes time. And so those people that commit 100 hours a week to work may be incredibly professionally successful. And if they're driven that way, all power to them. It's not a judgment from me, but it will impact on the quality of your relationship. So that those are choices that we all have to make. And even in relationships, it may be that one half of a couple, if there is a couple, says, do you know what, my job for the next 10 years is to go out there, you know, make it work, pay down a mortgage, do what, and your job is here. You know, those are conversations that we just need to have.
And another thing that you bring up in the book, I don't even have to go for my notes now because it all sticks in my head, was this piece of, even if you are returning to work and it's going to be 3 days a week, some people fall into the trap, they're actually doing 5 days and 3 days.
Yeah, that's true.
I saw your face just close there and
Just
shirk.
happens so often. I never did it really, but it's so difficult. I just see it so often. Yeah, it's really difficult for people who get paid for 3 or 4 days, but people are contacting them all the time. You know, I think I go back to the adage, there's no such thing as work-life boundaries. There's no such thing as work-life balance. There's just rules that you can put in for yourself. And one of the things that I always see with parenting is that in a crisis, if you have two competing needs, if you've got a child that needs a bedtime story and you've got a crisis at work, work will always win. Work will always show up as more urgent and more important than the day-to-day. But over time, that reading that story, that 5 minutes at the end of the day, that peaceful half an hour, that family tea, that was the one possibly that we should have spent our time doing. So the only way we can protect that is actually to say, this is my boundary. At 6 o'clock, the phone goes off, everything happens, and then I'm at home. I'll check it later, maybe if that's the kind of job that I have, maybe I'll check it at 8 o'clock and make sure that there is nothing on fire. But that time is precious, because if we don't set that aside, then work will always win.
And that's where it takes discipline, isn't it? It's that marginal gains, that little consistencies that we have to say, okay, this is bedtime, this is our bedtime routine, this is how we read books, or this is how we eat, or whatever, which is great. And this is where then, if there's a can you talk us through alpha, and then there's alpha, beta. So just remind us again, alpha.
So alpha is a term that I use to describe people who are driven by their career, versus beta, who are prepared at that point in time to take a step back, or to have a less less high profile or demanding job. And sometimes in couples, you end up with one person who's got a really big job and they're, 80 hours a week running a company, and someone else who's maybe working part-time at school, and that would be an alpha beta couple. And that can work really well as long as both of the couple are really happy in the roles, neither of them feels exploited. And also that there's a fair distribution, because what happens if it goes wrong with alpha beta couples is the alpha one, who's running the company or whatever, says, oh, I don't have to do any washing, I don't get involved in any cleaning, I don't do bedtimes, I'm never in pickup. And then the second person, who still has a job, remember, ends up doing all of the rest, and that can end up feeling really frustrating. So you've got to keep the lines of communication open. You've got to keep a sense on both sides that the deal is broadly fair and that both people are compromising. It isn't just one person compromising. And then we have alpha, which you know I've already talked about. We've both got big jobs, where it tends to be that people spend money on support, or possibly move their parents in, or very locally, and they kind of make it work that way. Again, works really well if they're both happy, and they both want to do what they're doing. The risk there is that there's a problem down the road and their finances are set up in a way it's difficult for one of them to step back from work. So that's the one to watch out for there. And then of course we have couples where the dad decides they want to be the lead partner. Maybe they step out of work, or maybe they take a second job. And that's what happened with my husband. He was offered redundancy from British Telecom, two-peed companies, after a long time, and he decided that he would be the primary anchor parent for our household. And that's worked really, really well for us. Again, I tell some stories in the book. I don't tell ours, try not to, expose our family too much, but, you've got to appreciate each other. You've got to appreciate what each other does. You can't think the person earning money, that they are more important than the person at home, because that's not how the world works.
And that's where there's some teething issues that people can avoid when there is a lead parent. That's where, you're taking on the mental load there. And I think that's where working parents, that if we figure out what the mental load is and how we can actually make sure it's not loaded on one, that fair piece. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I know that's something that I wish I had learned earlier. What is the mental load? So I came across this term back
So
in
the
maybe
mental load
2016.
is all the thinking that happens to be a parent, which is the big stuff to the small stuff. It's what are we going to have for dinner tonight and on Tuesday? Which load of washing needs to go through? What day is the play day? What present do we need for Sam's party at the weekend? What time is the hockey pickup? What time's football finish? What time is drama? What costume do they need to go to the Victorian Museum tomorrow? There's all these things that are constantly. I call it the ticker tape. You know, it's like a ticker tape
Yeah.
like under the news of just things, and it never stops. And it generally is one parent carries that. And one observation I have, I don't know if this is biology or socialization, is that even when you have the mother with the bigger job and the dad at home, it's often the mum that still keeps a lot of those thoughts in her head. So I just told you, like Chris, my husband is the lead parent, but he would still
Yeah.
almost always ask me, well, when's hockey? What time's that pickup? Does she have
Yeah.
a different kit for this? So a lot of the thinking is happening here. And Eve Rodsky wrote an amazing book called Fair Play, which I always recommend, which is about the balance between parents and who does what. And one of the things she says, if you take a task on as a parent, so say, and this is a relatively common one, sometimes there'll be dads who say, right, I'm going to do all the cooking. But when she actually investigated that, it'd be like they turn up and cook the meal. And she would say, no, the whole task of cooking is deciding what you're going to have, making a shopping list, organising for the food to be delivered or going to get it, cooking it, clearing up. That's the complete task. So if you take a task, take the complete task. Don't just take out bits of it. She tells this very funny story about her own dad says, oh, I look after the cat. That's my job. And she really interrogates it. What do you do? Well, I take the cat to the vet. Right. Who gives the cat the medicine? Oh, that's your mother. Who makes the vet's appointment? Oh, that's your mother. Who changes the cat's litter tray? Oh, that's your mother. So actually, it's kind of like sometimes and I think, my husband's the one at home, so sometimes it's me that kind of goes, yeah, I'm taking them to here, without actually having, done some of the things around it. So it's about whole tasks.
And that's what I really like about that. There's really a discipline about organizing yourselves and being very clear about communication. Here that you were saying there. The other thing I'd like to talk about then is what should leaders think about, or if someone was going on maternity leave, what's the best way that I should be talking to that person about returning to work, or what's the best way that we make sure that there's a level playing field here? Because we talk about the pay gap starts emerging there. If you want to talk a little bit about that, because that's what I like is you talk about this from a systemic level as well. So from a leadership point of view.
So I would say that the biggest problem organizations have now, and most of my speaking now isn't about the book, it's about the world of work, as you referenced.
Yeah.
Most of the conversations that I have are about productivity through the screen of people feeling totally overwhelmed all the time by incoming communications and demand for tasks. And that means that it's very difficult to contain professional knowledge-based jobs because that demand for information is endless and you can never satisfy it. And so coming back from maternity or paternity leave and thinking, well, I want 2 solid hours a day where I just engage with my kid is a huge change in how we work. So what I would say to leaders and managers is not just for your people who are coming back from parent leave. Think about this holistically. How do we reduce the communication overwhelm that people in teams feel so that they can focus on tasks, do a really good job, and then stop and go and do something else? It doesn't matter whether they go and play in a five-a-side football match or sing in a choir or go home and bath their kids, as long as it's what they want to do. What matters is that we contain work more effectively. And that, I think, has become a very pressing job for leaders and managers, and one they find very difficult.
And this is where people have, like Amazon saying, is we're returning to 5 days to work, because it's just the complexity of it. They're not actually doing the work of, well, what is the job that we need to do, and how do we communicate with each other, and what are the rules or boundaries around that? Do you think there's a bit of work avoidance by the organization?
Bruce Daisley, who I do vlogs on sometimes with on LinkedIn, he put out a report today noting that a lot of the companies that have moved back to 5 days a week are people who've had poor financial results. So you often see leadership teams going, something's gone wrong, God forbid we should take any responsibility for this strategically, let's get everybody back to work. We don't have the evidence that being back in the office full-time is more productive. What we do know is you pay 15 to 20% more for people and you don't get such good candidates on your shortlist, because 85–90% of people do not want to be back 5 days a week if they can avoid it. So you are getting worse people at a higher price. If that is your strategy, that's absolutely fine. If that's your brand, if that's the way your organization has to work, that is up to you, but you have to know that about it. So I don't think that those decisions are motivated by productivity, because the data doesn't support it. I think they're motivated by, usually the decisions are made by baby boomer men, so older men, who operated very successfully in what I would call the breadwinner model. So they had a partner who stayed at home and raised their kids and ran their household. And they're usually, by definition, very successful. They've succeeded in offices. And so they just see that as the right way to do it. There's no malice in it. They just like, it worked for me, it works for everyone, without appreciating that the following generation, my generation, your generation, and younger, are looking at it going, well, hang on, we've got 2 adults working if we're in a dual income household, and we can't make it all fit in a way that it did for you.
And that's where even DEI panels could actually play a part. How do we make sure that everybody's needs are I suppose, being catered for? So just on that leadership piece then. So we'll say, for example, someone's listening in here and they're thinking about, okay, um, I'm feeling the pressure to, I've got a promotion and I have to work, crazy hours a week, and I'm in an alpha couple then. Is that the situation where one of us need to have a conversation like the seasonal piece? Do we need to step back a little bit? Or is it I need to reevaluate how I'm approaching the job? Or is it all of the above?
I think it depends on your situation. I mean, if you're both alpha, you've got big jobs and you're loving it, it's working for you, you've got the support that you need, and your kids are happy, you may just say, do you know what, this works for us, this is the way we want to live our lives, get on with it. If one of you is unhappy in your job or totally overwhelmed, not sleeping, I interviewed a lot of people in the book who were taking sleeping tablets, plus or minus a couple of glasses of red wine, to get through the stress, and then to try and sleep, and then waking up at 3 a.m. And if you're in that kind of a spiral, then it's definitely time to sit down, have some serious chats about how do we want to live, what's going to work for us. And if you are overwhelmed at work, if you're working for an American investment bank, probably there are not many jobs that are going to be lower pressure. So is that the right environment for you? Are there sideways moves you could make, or is this the deal that you want still? If it isn't, it's time to plan a bit differently. In another organization, it may be that you can talk to your boss and say, look, this is working, this isn't working, can we move things around a bit? So you can only really navigate that when you're in it and can see what the options might be.
Yeah, and this is something I read in a newspaper a couple of years ago, and it's funny, when I was reading the book then I went, oh my God, I can't believe that was published in a national newspaper. So here is the thing: there was a financial advisor saying it's better off if working couples that one person takes a break from work for an extended number of years because it works out better financially. And then I turned to, well, what? This was a financial advisor. I can see by your face you're shocked.
Well, I just don't think that's true financially, because we know that there's a huge pension gap between men and women.
This is
Men on
it.
average end up, I can't remember exactly the details, I'm sure they're in the book in by this time, but I think men end up with a pension pot which is often a third, 50% bigger than their female partners. So I did interview someone not long ago, it was post the book, who said both of her parents had done exactly the same job in the same organisation they met through work. But because her mother had taken 5 years out for 2 children, their pension pots were enormously different, because it was so long ago, the compound interest had had such an impact. So I'm not sure what that financial advisor was getting at, because my understanding is, and a lot of the advice to women has been, look, even if you can't work full time, try and stay in, try and save a bit into your pension if you can, if you're thinking about it through a financial lens.
Yeah. And that's where the pay gap then emerges then as well, even with promotions and stuff like that. And that's the dilemma that sometimes women will face then of the pay gap. Like, what could organizations or leaders do to change the systemic approach.
The ways that an organisation that I did some work with, it was quite a big UK retailer, was they often promote women while they're on maternity leave as a symbol
Yeah.
internally that they have faith in women doing a great job after they've had kids. And, they'll help them manage the workload, but, they think it's good practice not to hold people back when they're having children. And I think that's a really important, I think symbolism is really important. I think practical support is really important from organisations. And I think really thinking about the communications and overwhelm, helping people say no to meetings, helping people decide when they're contactable and when they're not, and what's reasonable, is really, I think that's going to become an increasingly important role for leaders.
And that's where you talk about leaders who might be well-intentioned and maybe not given responsibilities or workload to people, and then they're missing out on opportunities then. So that's where people are well-intentioned, but actually that might be, people might be allergic to that. So like, what is it for people who may not have that knowledge or understanding or ignorant? What advice would you give to especially male managers if someone's returning to work?
I think sometimes these things get so wrapped up in the legals that people don't have the conversation. Do you want to travel with work now? Is that something that is something that's appealing to you? And so one person might say, good Lord, no, if I can possibly avoid it, I never want to get on an aeroplane again. And someone else will say, actually, I want to carry on as before. The way we've worked things in our household is that that's possible. So I think having better conversations is absolutely the key, and not making assumptions.
Yeah, and that's the trap that people fall into. You think you're doing people a favor, and that's where conflict. Because you talk about, avoiding burnout and conflict there. That's something that I suppose, we have to lean into, is to be brave to have those courageous conversations.
We do, yeah, and it is difficult, but we've got to have them.
So when you talk about, your models of work, 6 models of work, then like, what is it that like people could do better in the workplace when it comes to those models?
So let's just explain what we mean by the 6 models. So what I say is that pre-COVID, we kind of had one way of working, which was you turn up, you did your job and you went home, and then you did emails and so on in the evenings. We've really mutated that since COVID into, by my count, 6 ways of working. So we're fully remote, and then we have a second version of that, which is work from anywhere, which is fully remote, but with regular team get-togethers, strategy days, etc. You've got the 2 forms of hybrid. You've got fluid hybrid, you choose what days you come in. Fixed hybrid, you come in Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, whatever. You've then got the 4-day week, or a new model from Germany coming out where a very limited day, like a 5-6 hour working day for everybody. And then you've got a full return to office. And I think the beauty of the 6 ways of working is that you can look for employers that match the way that you want to work. I think the downside of it is that organisations in the middle have often not done the work to make their model work. So the full return to office, we all kind of know how that works. The 4-day week guys tend to have put a lot of, all the 6-hour day, tend to have put a lot of thought and time into making those structures work. And the fully remote teams have put a lot of effort into making fully remote work. Where we have hybrid, fixed and fluid, often organisations are saying they just haven't done the work. They they go into the office, no one else is there, they spend all day on Teams, but they don't have enough booths. There's no time to do the actual work. There's too much communication. The people you need to see are not there. The training's online when they want it to be in person, or in person when no one's there. There's a lot of muddle that I think people are still sorting out.
Yeah, and that's where I suppose this podcast, we're trying to direct people and signpost them there. And if we were to signpost people to more of your work and more that you do, how might we do that, Christine?
Well, as you've already very kindly mentioned, my main vehicle is that I have a blog on Friday mornings on LinkedIn. So follow me on LinkedIn. I have a website, armstrongpartners.co.uk, where I talk about my speaking and facilitation, and people can go on there and sign up. I do a weekly newsletter with the blog. So people can sign up there and get in touch. I would love to hear from them.
Christine, thank you so much for joining the Workplace Podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. See you on a Viking ship soon.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to the Workplace Podcast with your host, William Corless. Our special thanks to this episode's guest for sharing their expertise with us. If you found this episode valuable, please rate and review it. For updates on future episodes and to get in contact with us about any workplace topics, please follow Yellowwood on LinkedIn and Twitter at Different Paths. As always, you can head over to yellowwood.ie for any other information. Yellowwood, your external learning and development partner, provider of executive coaching, facilitation and training. Take a different path to success with your career, leadership, team and organisation.